Another thing that you brought up is when you were talking about how you would speak to parents and you had 25 years of practice and you kept refining what you said, you talked about repeating yourself. So it sounds like what we see in the classroom all the time. We see children doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? As they kind of master their skills. And you were like doing that, right? You were just doing that. It was like, oh, I have to give another parent talk. Oh, I have to give another talk. Oh, I have to give another talk. And so you had all of this opportunity to repeat yourself and refine your skills. So
Mhm.
that's one of the human tendencies that I think is common, and parents see. And sometimes they freak out because they're like, you're just doing the same thing again and again and again. How can we tell the difference, either as a teacher in the classroom or as a parent, when children are repeating something skillfully in a skillful way so that they truly become masters versus when they're just kind of doing something that's not that valuable?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, let's see. I hear two questions in there. The first is with parents. Um, I find that so when I'm giving talks, it's always slightly different. They always have a different title. There's always something different that I'm saying. I know that some of the people coming to the talk are coming for their 14th time and they are on their fourth child. And I want them to come. And some people just walked in the door and have no idea, they've got an 18-month-old. So what I mean by repeating is I'm saying different things, but I go back to some of the same themes. So I always started the beginning of the year talking about the prepared environment. So preparing at home and at school. So I'd start with the environment. And each time people would hear something different because they're coming to it from different experience. And they're like, okay, I've got that part. Now I'm ready for something a little more refined. So they'll hear something different in it. So the repetition is more structural. It's more helping people come back to the main basic things, the main basic themes in Montessori, giving them that foundation to build off of. With children, I think it's once you know what to look for, it becomes very clear to a teacher when a child is repeating something, just going through the motions. Sometimes they do that because it's familiar and they love it. I had a child one time, her parents were going through a divorce and she was 4 years old. And she came in and took out the same materials in the same sequence every morning for about 6 months.
Wow.
And she needed it. She needed to do that. She was getting something out of it. But when you watch a child repeat with something, I think you're looking for the concentration, the focus, the flow, eye contact, the way they're looking at something, their body language, they're doing it over and over and over. They get so involved in it. That's very different than repeating, sort of coloring, same thing. And they're sort of chatting to friends and they're looking around and, they want you to look at it. They're looking for something else. They're trying to do that material to get something else, not to get out of the material what it really has to offer. And that's when it's time to say, I have something else to show you. And it's something that takes their skills and challenges them a little further. And I think this is a big theme in Montessori that Csikszentmihalyi talked about this match when he wrote about flow, the match of challenge, just the right amount of challenge to match where that person is. And that's what we're looking for in Montessori. When they're not challenged enough, you need to give them something that's a little more challenging, but not so challenging that it's overwhelming and they withdraw from it. So finding that match, I think that's what Montessori is about, is just constantly finding a match, finding a match, finding a match, finding a match. And then the child starts to do it for themselves because they start feeling, I love that feeling when I get into flow. They start coming in the room and they go to something that they feel is going to be the right challenge. And then as adults, I think Montessori graduates is one of the things that they do. They engage in work, they focus on it, they find a match, they enjoy challenge. They aren't just looking for busy work.
Mm-hmm. So describing that, you're really getting into the 8 character traits because you were talking just about how you can observe a child and you're going to see them engaged and focused and curious. And so how did you, this 8 character traits, it's a new thing in Montessori. It's a brand new thing. Tell me about that. Why did you come up with this? How did you come up with it? And how did those 8 get chosen? I'll just quickly say the 8 are engagement, focus, organization, curiosity, courage, collaboration, respect, and resourcefulness. And I went through and I tried to map those to human tendencies because I'm like, are these already covered? Like, do they tell me? So I just want to hear more about you with the 8 traits.
Oh, it's a great question. I found that, I mean, we know that Montessori jargon can turn people off. They can lose interest when we start talking about Montessori jargon. So I was trying to put things in really simple terms for people, but found that still it was a little hard sometimes for people to really understand why Montessori is relevant. So I start out the book by saying, and this is very interesting, I wrote this before COVID, that the world is changing so quickly and technology is changing things in our lives so rapidly. And we don't know what the future will bring. And so we don't know what skills our children are going to need in terms of actual jobs. It's constantly changing. There's no way to predict the future. And this has always been true that you can't predict the future. But we do know that children need to be persistent. Young people need to be able to solve problems. They need to be able to think creatively. They need to be able to collaborate and work together in teams. There are certain skills for life that no matter what you're going to do are going to help you to survive and thrive. And as a society, as a species, as a culture, as human beings on this earth, these things are really important. And education should speak to those. Education should prepare young people for those skills. And then the pandemic hit. And I'm laughing over the first few lines of the book because I was like, okay, well, now it sounds almost ridiculous to say this because it's so obviously true. But, you know, in any time and place, these things are important. So I started to think, how do we help children in Montessori learn to think creatively, work together, solve problems? And are these things addressed in conventional school? They're not really. And that's why you have these you have progressive movements in education. And you also have people come in with, okay, it's great that everybody is learning their math skills, but we're going to have somebody come in and teach you social skills now. You know, there's always these add-ons, right? And Montessori, we see everything is already interwoven in. So we're already doing the work that needs to be done to develop these abilities. So I started thinking, what do you need before those abilities? What helps you to think creatively? What helps you to work together with other people? What are we actually doing in Montessori that helps make these things happen? So these 8 traits are ones that I came up with by watching, thinking, talking to other Montessori educators. You know, we talk a lot about concentration. We talk a lot about normalization. We talk a lot about the human tendencies. We talk about the the sensitive periods and the psychological characteristics and the absorbent mind. But what do these things really mean? So I thought, if I gave readers 8 traits or however many to think about the whole time they're reading the book, I can keep pointing out to them, see, we're doing this, this is how it happens. Montessori, we're not just giving lip service to these abilities, we're actually making it happen. And these are natural things that human beings are born with the potential for. We're born with the potential to focus and concentrate. We're born with the potential to collaborate with other human beings. These are natural desires and behaviors in human beings, but education ought to foster them if we're going to have those kinds of outcomes. And so here's how Montessori fosters that over and over and over. And so I pull out those moments, I give those anecdotes, I tell a story, and then I say, see this, see these traits. So I wanted to give people these threads going from the beginning of the book all the way to the end. where they felt convinced and they could really see evidence of these kinds of traits. So the traits I came up with by talking to people and thinking about it and analyzing different stories I had, and I have a story about the last one. I had 7 traits, and I was traveling with my son to see a couple of colleges when he was looking at colleges. And when we went to Swarthmore College, there we have a graduate from Forest Bluff School who attends there. And I asked his mother if I could get his contact information. I asked if we could stop by the student center or whatever and have a coffee with him and say hi. And so he very kindly did that. And I told him, I'm writing this book, I'm working on it, and I've come up with these 7 traits. What do you think? And I listed them, and he said, oh, and I had taught him when he was younger. He said, oh, Mrs. Preschlack, you're missing the most important one, resourcefulness. He said, I find myself being resourceful all the time. And I completely know that that comes from my Montessori experience. And I see in students around me that they have a really hard time being resourceful. And I always figure out, where can I find that information? How can I learn this? What other ways can I do this? And that's from being in a classroom where there was only one teacher and there was a lot going on in the room, and she wasn't available to you 24/7, and you had to figure some things out on your own. And there was a lot of opportunity in the environment to find answers for yourself, other people you could work with, people you could ask for help. And so that resourcefulness gets baked in to how you do your work and how you go about your day. So I just loved that it came to him like that. And I went around and asked Montessori graduates for years, do you think these are traits that you developed in Montessori? Am I missing anything? And so on. So I kind of kept retesting them. So that's how I came up with those.
Wow, I love that. That's a great story. I'm thinking, and I think you started to say this, that these traits really, they're helping us adapt to whatever situations arise.
Exactly. So adaptation became a bigger theme in the manuscript when we watched what happened with COVID. And I thought, well, adaptation is what Montessori is all about. And I did a lot of reading of her work, and I keep going back to her books, and I kept seeing that over and over. She talked about adaptation and what is the ultimate goal of education should be to help us adapt. So absolutely.
So that we're a member of our time, our place in our group. Yeah.
And we can survive with whatever is happening. So how do we adapt, and how do we address global warming, strife in our society? What are we going to do about it? So I think, I see a lot of conversation and pressure on the next generation to solve problems. And I do see that, a 4th grader, for instance, being lectured at in their science class by their teacher, it's awful what human beings are doing to the earth, et cetera, et cetera. And what concerns me the most about this burden is that what I see, especially after the pandemic, which has been overwhelming for all of us on so many levels, is young people disengaging, especially early 20s, disengaging from politics, disengaging from wanting to solve the world's problems, and turning to entertainment and other places because it is so overwhelming. So what I wanted to get across in the book is that there's a time and place for the way we talk about solving the problems of the future with young people. And we have to help them first to adapt. And one of the great gifts that Montessori gave us was the positive way of looking at human beings and the earth and what has come before us, looking at the positives so that children have the courage and can see themselves and their goodness first. And then they're ready to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's super important, because educators can be, and parents can be so quick to run to the finish line and say, now you've got to solve all this awful stuff that's happening. And it is really not the way to go about it, I think. So I'm hoping, there are many places in the book where I talk about, Montessori gave us so much that we can work with. So hopefully that appeals to people, that positive aspect of Montessori.
Yeah, and I love the examples that you give. They're really powerful, and it brings a lot of things to life. I want to follow up on this statement you just made, and you didn't say it exactly this way, but that positivity leads to courage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you think that happens? Why do you say that?
Well, when one experiences successes first and starts to feel what that feels like, it gives you courage to keep going even when it's difficult. So that's something that we're born with. Montessori watch infants, and you see an infant push themselves and push themselves and push themselves and push themselves and try and try and try. So we're born with that courage. We're born with that persistence. We're born with that resilience. And in conventional school, I would argue that is really thwarted in many ways by having children compete with each other for grades, by constantly grading and judging their performance. In Montessori, where you have the control of error in the materials, where you have the control of error in the activity itself, where the adult responds positively, and instead of correcting, saying, I'm going to show, just representing, now I'm going to take a turn, and the child gets to see it again. It's a very gentle way. It's a human way. It's a very kind way. It's an inviting way to engage and collaborate and cooperate. And children learn not only what that feels like, and then have the courage to try again when they can't get they can't find the right answer in their math, and they keep trying. But they also learn then to treat other people that way. So I'll watch Montessori graduates, and then even interacting with me, I'll notice, I'll be doing a Zoom interview with some graduates, and they are so polite. They're so kind. They are so gentle in the way they say things. Not to a fault, but I mean, just they're courteous, and that makes other people feel braver about speaking up, about being themselves. It invites cooperation. So that'll help them in their parenting. It helps in everything that we need to do. So I think that positive interaction, and Montessori talked a lot about the transformation of the adult, that the teacher goes through this training where you really learn to tap into, people love children. Everybody who wants to become an educator has a love for children. But in Montessori, I think you train to tap into that love and have your interactions reflect that love in a respectful way in everything that you do. There's an opportunity to be that positive. And I think that's really important. That orientation is a shift, and it strikes me and jars me so much when I see or hear, even on the news. I was listening to a podcast, and there was a tight little clip of an adult, a teacher, speaking to a fifth grader, and the way they said what they said was just, oh, that hurts so much. Why would you do that? But it's just common. It's just what people
It's so common.
And that teacher
Yeah.
loves that child. She doesn't mean it at all. But we do have to go through training. We do have to go through resetting our way of approaching children if we're going to do this in Montessori's way. It's really important.
Yeah. And you mentioned that this positivity, it leads the children to appreciate themselves. And that is first, and it's so funny, that's the same as in the Buddhist teachings, is that you must, and with Maitri, my company is named after Maitri, or Maitri, which is having a compassionate and kind heart, particularly toward yourself. Because when you have that gentleness toward yourself, you can then have that gentleness towards others. When you're harsh with yourself, you generally end up being harsh with others because there's a lot of judgment happening. And letting
Mhm.
that judgment go is so much more kind.
Right. Isn't it interesting that I think in other religions too, I mean, certainly in Christianity, you try to take the stance that, God loves you first and you're forgivable, and then you go out into the world, right? So I think in other religions as well, there is that perspective. And it is still very hard for us to accept. It is very hard for us to accept that we're lovable and to treat ourselves that way. It would be such a different world if it was more natural for us. And so, but I do believe that more children having a Montessori education could make a difference. I really do.
Well, one thing that they found in education research is what they call the self-efficacy decline.
Mm,
And they see from the beginning of school until you graduate high school, there is a dramatic decrease over the years and a consistent decrease over the years of your self-efficacy, which is very similar to self-confidence or just your understanding of your own capacities,
hmm
right? And that declines. And so these incidental ways of being that you just described with that teacher just being harsh, and
hmm
you notice it because you have this shifted
hmm
view.